What if the person you trusted most was secretly planning your downfall? This isn't just a story, it's a journey into betrayal, love, and shocking truth. Stay with me until the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next story might just be the one you've been waiting for. He returned home in a wheelchair to test the woman who claimed she loved him. Silence greeted him, the maid's tears told him who truly cared. He had no idea how deep the dark plan would be. Kyle stood before the bathroom mirror, towel over his shoulder, studying the face that looked back as if it were somebody else's. 42. Billionaire. Owner of companies whose names were whispered but rarely linked to him. The mirror offered no trophies, only creases of worry and a cautious, steady boredom with being fooled. 2 weeks earlier, a stray phone call had shifted everything. Lorena had left her mobile on speaker after ordering dinner through an app. Kyle heard her voice, soft, intimate, foreign to her usual tone with him. "Adieu, my love," she said. "Soon everything will be settled. Then you can leave your apartment forever." That tenderness, reserved for a different man, wouldn't leave him. He'd tried to confront her. She deflected with jokes, diverted conversations, and arranged commitments. The more she danced away, the more Kyle's doubt hardened into resolve. There was one man he trusted in the house, Gilmar, the driver who had been with him for over 15 years. Gilmar kept his word. He had seen Lorena arrive, watched her settle, watched the change. When Kyle told Gilmar the plan, the driver agreed without pause. The scheme was simple on paper: stage an accident, return in a wheelchair, watch. If Lorena loved him, she would stand firm. If not, the mask would fall. The staged crash was meticulous. A sudden swerve on a lonely stretch, a popped tire, a controlled slip into the embankment. The police did their part, authentic enough to be real to outside eyes, and a private hospital staged a convincing diagnosis of paraplegia. Kyle learned quickly to hold the details in his chest like a cold stone. The trick wasn't to break the illusion, it was to live it from the inside so completely that even those closest would not suspect the performance. Lorena arrived at the hospital with the measured concern of someone who has practiced care before. She sat by his bedside, held his hand with fingers that trembled more from impatience than grief, checked her phone, stepped out to accept calls. Her eyes rarely met his. Marta, the maid, was the opposite: raw, immediate, grief without performance. She wept freely, cradled his hand, smoothed the blanket across his legs as if the action could redeem all of it. Kyle watched it all with an actor's patience. The house was rearranged to accommodate his disability: ramps, widened doorways, emergency bells, but these changes meant nothing compared to the evidence his allies collected. Gilmar brought reports daily: photos of Lorena with adieu, messages, bank transfers. The more he saw, the less he wanted to act rashly. He closed the folder and told Gilmar, "Not yet. Let her think she's won. The fall will be harder." He played the injured man well. He fumbled for cups, made himself appear helpless, let Lorena offer perfunctory kisses and excuses. Marta's presence was constant and honest. She moved around him with a tenderness that belonged to a household member more than an employee. Her fidelity carved itself into Kyle's chest harder than any blade. Then one evening, as he sat on the veranda pretending to watch the city burn into night, he overheard Lorena. She spoke low, urgent into the phone: "Adieu, don't worry. He's useless now. He can't move. The lawyers will finish things. The house, the shares, everything will be ours. Just a little more time." Her voice softened on the last words, as if tasting them like a promise. The line tightened in Kyle's throat. He did not betray himself. Marta froze when she heard. Her knuckles went white around the tea tray. Lorena returning to the house hummed a tune that tasted like treachery. Kyle felt the old kindling of rage ignite into something colder, methodical, patient, certain. What followed was not a burst of aggression, it was a slow, invisible siege. Kyle refused the obvious retaliation. He would not confront, not yet. He had ruined businessmen who underestimated him in shorter times. This was different. This was domestic. Pride and pain reframed into strategy. He needed to dismantle the world Lorena thought she would inherit, quietly, legally, and with a cruelty that matched the betrayal. He started small. He allowed Lorena to be careless, encouraged her by appearing dependent. Gilmar and he worked beneath the surface. They adjusted account signatories subtly, rerouted legal papers so they would require 2 signatures. They began to seed new expectations, making Lorena think fortune had already been secured. In the meantime, they prepared a far more public, irreversible proof: records, contracts, secrets that, once revealed, would burn her credibility among the wealthy circles she coveted. That first week of deception bled into 2. Lorena moved through the house like a queen in an empty court, confident and cruelly efficient. Her messages to Adu grew bolder. The photographs showed them in restaurants, his hand at the small of her back. Texts revealed plans to transfer assets under shell companies. Kyle watched, cataloging each betrayal. He let her see what she thought were his weakest moments. If his intention was to hurt, he aimed for a professional death rather than a private one. He was a man who built empires from paper and code. His revenge would be the dismantling of her access, legal, social, financial. And he would make sure she saw every door close. But revenge has a habit of revealing more than the initial wound. As Kyle dug deeper into Lorena's plans, he found threads he hadn't anticipated: a lawyer who owed debts, an acquaintance who could be bought, a company in which Kyle had a silent stake that could become leverage. He tightened the noose, but he also discovered an unexpected variable: Lorena was not entirely heartless. She had moments, slivers, when the performance faltered and a memory of something like affection flickered across her face. Those moments confused him. They made him pause and reassess the person who had lived in his house and shared his bed. He watched Lorena at a fundraiser, smiling under lights for donors who meant little to her. He saw Eduardo at her side, always that same calculated ease. But he also saw Lorena hesitate at a child's photograph in a gallery, touch it for a heartbeat longer than the staging required, and then turn away. He wondered whether her affection for Eduardo had a different shape than his cynicism allowed. Betrayal is rarely a single color. Kyle's planning stretched into a meticulous architecture. He rewired corporate vestiges, trusts and signatures that would be transferred only through court orders, not through a woman's fleeting assurance. He hired forensic accountants whose eyes were like scalpels. He arranged for a friend in the legal system to keep a quiet eye on any will changes. He had the house's security cameras mirrored to a private server. He would not let her unravel his legacy without paying a price calibrated to make her regret the very idea of winning. One night, late, he summoned Lorena to the study under the pretense that he wished to speak about the future, about adjustments, care, and the slow reintroduction to responsibility. She came in, hair loose, mascara faint under her eyes, the makeup of convenience, not of tears. Lorena approached his wheelchair with a practiced ease, kneeling as though she might feel the weight of those ropes she had tied. "Kyle," she said softly. We'll be okay. He stopped her with a hand raised, the smile on his face small and careful. "You don't need to pretend in front of me, Lorena." She blinked. "Pretend? What are you?" He allowed the faintest laugh to pass. "Don't play stupid with me. I heard you. 2 weeks ago, outside the kitchen. You were talking to Adu." Her face shuddered. For a second she looked like someone who had been caught drunk, then composed herself. "You must be mistaken." "I'm not," he said. "But I'll let you keep your delusions for now. I don't want a scene in the house. Not yet. I want you to keep acting. So you can show me, day by day, whom you serve, me or yourself." Her breath left her. For the first time, fear hovered in her eyes. But then she smoothed her face into economy. "You're cruel," she said. "You hurt the people who love you." Love. He let the word hang. "Do you know what love looks like, Lorena? It looks like someone who's willing to stand when everything has fallen apart. It looks like someone who doesn't whisper of escape while the other person sleeps." "You don't know anything about me," she snapped. The brittle edge of that sentence revealed a person who had to be believed, by herself first. "And I thought I did," he said. "But now I see I didn't. You wanted an empire. You wanted comforts. But you didn't want me. You wanted the body of a man to sit beside while you arranged your world." She stood slowly. Her hand went to the back of a chair as though to steady herself. "If that's how you feel," she began. "Keep pretending you care," he said, surprising himself with the steadiness in his voice. "Act, kiss, call it devotion. The world will applaud you. But there will be consequences." The next morning, Lorena woke to small but effective changes. Her schedule was full of obligations. Dinners she had to host, charity events she had to attend, contracts that required her signature to be countersigned in person, by Kyle. He had not yet revoked anything, he had only complicated the path to power. She moved through weeks like a queen whose crown weighs heavier each day. Meanwhile, Kyle orchestrated a subtle counter-offensive at every front. He directed information to friends who could influence media narratives about trustee arrangements. He set up legal safeguards that made any transfer of assets drag through scrutiny he controlled. And he began to plant seeds among Lorena's acquaintances, hints of impropriety backed by irrefutable evidence. When the first complaint surfaced, an anonymous tip about Lorena's outside dealings, Lorena bristled, but Kyle acted as though it pained him too. He called for calm, promising a careful inquiry that would not disgrace the household. Her panic was small but visible, the sort that makes the most composed people on the verge of collapse. Lorena began to make mistakes. She left a message on an assistant's voicemail, flustered, rushed, discussing a wire transfer to a company that did not exist legally. It was small, to others it might have been nothing. To Kyle it was a hand submitting to a sieve. He could have engineered a harsher tactic, expose her publicly and make a spectacle. But he wanted precision. He wanted her to lose the incentive she had believed she possessed. So he targeted the foundations, those alliances and affluent friends who mattered most. To accomplish it, he called in favors few knew he had. An old rival he had once squeezed into bankruptcy owed him a debt, which Kyle now repaid in an odd way, by placing the man in a position to testify as a character witness for the household's integrity. A lawyer who had been friendly to Lorena's circle was quietly offered a lucrative retainer if they would switch sides. Relationships shifted like tectonic plates under a loaded sea. One afternoon, Lorena realized something. An account she relied on had been frozen pending audit. Her panic gave way to the kind of cold calculation Kyle had hoped to provoke. She lashed out behind closed doors, her voice raw and sharp. Eduardo's messages came in frenzied bursts now, the plan they thought so sound began to fray. And then came a moment Kyle had not planned for. Marta, who had wept and tended and loved him in a way that needed no performance, came to him quietly one night and said, "Señor, forgive me for saying this, but sometimes I think she, Lorena, was not only after money. I saw her with other things. I know you saw what you heard, but..." Marta's voice broke. She had been loyal not only to Kyle but to the household's idea of family. She once kept a child's toy in her bag. She cried when the little neighbor's son fell from a bicycle. She had moments. Maybe she is cruel. Maybe she is calculating. But she is not all of one stripe. Kyle listened, surprised by the gentleness in Marta's words. For a sliver of time, he let compassion nuance his hatred. He thought of the small, ordinary things, tea left warm by the bedside, a hand smoothing his blanket, a soft voice tucking mercy into a sentence. He thought of the cost to hurt someone altogether and wondered whether a total ruin was the only answer. But then the evidence returned, relentless and cold. A ledger. A contract. The same soft voice on the phone promising doors to a man named Eduardo. The betrayal was real, and signals of tenderness were, perhaps, only adornment. When the opportunity presented itself, Kyle acted with the surgical calm he had become known for. He called a meeting, invited friends, called in partners. He made sure his legal arrangements were airtight. And he invited Lorena to sit with him, asking nothing overtly, only to be present and witness. The evening was orchestrated like a symphony. Lights dimmed, the table set, photographs arranged. Then Kyle began to speak, soft, almost conversational. He talked about loyalty, about honesty, about the invisible architecture of trust that allowed their house to function. He spoke not as a man accusing but as a man reciting facts. He unfolded printouts and photographs, played recordings that made the room tilt, and watched Lorena's composure fracture. When the evidence was laid bare, her first instinct was to laugh, a brittle, absurd sound that made cart's handlers shift in their seats. Eduardo's face on the screen was a frozen testament. The recorded conversations played like a slow rolling thunder, leaving no place for denial. Lorena's hands shook. She tried to smile then, but the smile collapsed into something like loss. "Kyle," she said finally, voice small. "This is not how I..." "You never needed me," Kyle interrupted gently. "You needed the privileges." She rose, furious now, the performance stripped to something raw. "You are a monster. You call it what you will," he replied. But I am not the monster who thought to divide a household for profit. Lorena lunged, a poor, absurd attempt at grabbing documents. Security blocked her path with quiet professional motions. Gilmar's eyes were flat and immovable. Lorena's fury turned to accusation, to tears, to bargaining. She promised love with the desperation of someone negotiating the final terms of a will. But the room had already shifted. Friends whispered. Allies took in a new view. The date on some contracts could not be altered without inspection. Banks froze lines that had been promised. Trustees demanded hearings before any distributions could take place. Word spread, as it always does, faster than Lorena could manage. The very social fabric she had spun around herself began to fray. People who had been ready to celebrate her sudden ascent now stepped back, not unkindly but in the arithmetic of fortune. The law, the press, the quiet gossip of the rich, each moved the same way, away. Lorena fought publicly, tried to salvage dignity, but the tide was against her. Eduardo vanished, leaving messages that were at first indignant and then silent. She would make calls that went unanswered. Her friends would offer worried looks but little help. Kyle watched it happen like someone who recognized an old story. Betrayal precipitates isolation. Isolation precipitates exposure. And yet, in the silent hours after the curtain fell, when the house was stripped of its performances, Kyle found himself awake with a strange, hollow victory. He had won, he had protected the empire from the very traitor who had once shared his room. But victory tasted like a room with the furniture rearranged, familiar yet hollow. He had not only exposed Lorena, he had broken a family pattern. The cost was not only her ruin but also the need to confirm he had not become what he hated. Marta's face, unadorned, remained at his side through the nights that followed. She had not celebrated the downfall, she had only continued to tend. Gilmar returned to his steady silence, picking up the roles of normal life as if nothing extraordinary had transpired. For all their quiet and loyalty, they were the ones who had kept the house whole. Lorena's final exit was unceremonious. She packed quickly, her movements sharp with the energy of someone trying to escape the smell of shame. She left a terse note, no apology, no attempt at reconciliation. Later, in a public statement she denied the worst accusations, argued for context, and framed herself as a victim of misinterpretation. But the ledger was a stern witness, signatures do not apologize. In the months after, Kyle slowly reclaimed the mundane rituals of the life he had staged. He learned to use his hands again in small, calculated movements, wielding a cane here, learning the balance of a chair there, none of which would have surprised those who knew his determination. He rebuilt contracts, reassured partners, and reinforced the legal scaffolding around his assets. The house slowly became a home once more, though the laughter that had once punctuated rooms was different, more careful, less lavish. And Lorena, she became a cautionary tale in certain circles, an arc that moved quickly from the glitter of potential to the silence of exile. People whispered about ambition misdirected, about the cracks that appear when scaffolding replaces sincerity. She found employment elsewhere in smaller venues, where the stakes were lower and the light less bright. She tried to reconstruct a life that was not built exclusively on other people's fortunes. It was, in a way, honest work. Kyle, for his part, continued to carry the scar of what had been done to him, and what he had done in return. He had not delighted in the ruin, he had taken a grim satisfaction in the precise justice that made a predator lose appetite. Sometimes he would catch himself replaying Lorena's laugh, or Marta's hands steadying a cup. In those moments he would think of mercy and whether a measure of forgiveness might have been feasible. He had chosen strategy over compassion, and the choice had consequences. In time, when asked by those who barely knew the contours of his life, he would describe betrayal as a lesson in economy. He would tell, for a moment, what it felt like to be mortally convinced that your private life was an entry in a ledger to be skimmed. He would not be sentimental about the method of response, only articulate about results. Yet on certain nights, when the house was quiet and the city hummed like an electric memory beyond his windows, Kyle would wheel himself to the veranda and look out over the lights. He would think of the people who had remained, Marta, Gilmar, and of the one who had chosen otherwise. He would acknowledge, with an odd tenderness, how fragile the edges of trust could be. He would accept that he had been made to learn the shape of that fragility the hardest way possible. Revenge had been precise. It had been efficient. It had been final. But in the quiet afterward, Kyle understood that the most dangerous thing in life is not the enemy who betrays you, it is the self you risked when you decided to respond. He closed his eyes, feeling the cool night. He had protected the legacy he had spent a life building. The house stood. The accounts were safe. People he trusted remained. The betrayer had been cast out. Yet in that small, private ledger inside him, a new entry had arrived. A line that read not in numbers, but in an old, human language, cautionary and undeniable. Never again, or at least, not without asking the cost first. And so he lived on, king of the holdings he cherished, prisoner of the knowledge that safeguarding an empire often demands a vigilance that consumes more than the palace. It consumes a part of the keeper's quiet, honest self. He learned, finally, the sharp boundary between protection and punishment, and the uneasy peace that followed. And in that moment, he finally understood, sometimes love wears a mask, and the ones who seem invisible are the ones who truly care. The truth had cost him pain, but it also gave him freedom. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next chapter of fate may be even more unforgettable.